Three moons hang over a planet that shouldn't exist. Auroras bleed colors no human eye was built to see. Below them, a station floats in the dark glass and crystal, and the hum of two civilizations trying not to destroy each other. Inside, corridors glow with living light. Diplomats file out of a conference room after 12 hours of arguments that could reshape the galaxy. Data pads scatter across a polished table. Cold coffee. Exhaustion thick enough to taste. One man stays behind, loosening his collar, rubbing his temples. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was never the first choice. Across the room, she stands at the holo display, golden hair catching starlight, dark eyes watching him the way she's watched him for months, careful, patient, waiting for something he doesn't know he's about to say. He makes a joke about marriage. She doesn't laugh. She says yes. There are days in your life that split everything into before and after. You don't see them coming. That's the cruel part. They look like ordinary days. Coffee, paperwork, arguments about tariff structures, so boring they could be classified as a sleep aid. And then someone says 6 words, and the whole universe tilts sideways. But we'll get to that. Callum Wren had decided, somewhere around hour 11 of the negotiation session, that diplomatic protocol was humanity's greatest act of self-torture. The crystalline observation deck of the Valorian Embassy Station offered a view that travel agencies would commit crimes for. Swirling auroras in colors that didn't exist in Earth's atmosphere. 3 moons hanging like pearls against the void. Cloud formations that moved in patterns suggesting the planet below had strong opinions about meteorology. Callum wasn't looking at any of it. I was staring at subsection 47 of the Resource Allocation Framework, wondering if anyone in recorded history had ever died from reading the phrase reciprocal tariff adjustments too many times. Probably not, but he was willing to be the first. The station hummed around him. That particular frequency that meant the gravitational stabilizers were working overtime. Humans needed 0.92 Earth gravity to function during extended negotiations. Valorians preferred 0.87. The compromise was 0.895, and a persistent vibration that made his coffee taste like it was annoyed about something. I took a sip of what the Valorians called morning stimulant, which was their third attempt at recreating coffee, and somehow tasted worse than the previous 2. The first version had been aggressively minty, like someone had liquefied an entire tube of toothpaste and heated it up. The second had the texture of warm sand, which was an achievement, honestly, because Callum didn't know liquid could have the texture of sand. But the Valorians had found a way. This one, this third attempt, it tasted like someone had explained the concept of coffee to a machine that had never experienced flavor, only read about it in technical manuals. And then that machine had tried its best, and its best was terrible. Callum drank it anyway, because the alternative was falling asleep during Princess Seraphina's presentation on shipping lane exclusivity zones. And that seemed like the kind of diplomatic incident that started wars. He wasn't supposed to be here. That was the thing Callum carried with him like a stone sewn into his coat. Every morning, every negotiation session, every time someone on the delegation looked at him with that particular expression, the one that said, "You're not him." Callum Wren, his older brother, the brilliant one, the natural diplomat who could walk into a room full of hostile ambassadors and walk out with a signed agreement and dinner invitations. Declan had been assigned to the Valorian trade negotiations 2 years ago. He'd spent 6 months building frameworks, establishing trust, laying the groundwork for what was supposed to be the most significant interstellar trade agreement in human history. And then he died. Not dramatically, not heroically, not in some cinematic explosion during a daring mission. He'd been on a routine diplomatic transport between stations. A navigation system malfunction. The ship had dropped out of quantum transit at the wrong coordinates, directly into an asteroid field. Gone. Just like that. The universe didn't care about potential. Didn't care that Declan Wren was supposed to change the course of human-alien relations. Didn't care that he had a younger brother who worshipped him and a mother who never recovered, and a diplomatic framework that was only half finished. The universe just kept spinning. And the Earth Diplomatic Corps needed someone to finish Declan's work. Someone who knew the files, someone who could step in quickly, someone expendable enough that if the negotiations failed well, at least they hadn't lost anyone important. So they sent Callum, not as first choice, not even as second. He was the replacement for the replacement. The guy they sent when the guy they sent got sick. A mid-level diplomatic attaché whose primary qualification was sharing DNA with the man who'd actually been good at this job. 8 months. He'd been on the station 8 months now. And every single day, someone somewhere compared him to Declan. Ambassador Margot Lindell did it gently, a hand on his shoulder. Your brother would have handled this the same way. Which sounded kind until you realized it meant she was always measuring, always checking, holding a ghost up next to the living man and wondering which one she'd rather be working with. The Valorian advisors did it less gently. Lord Draven in particular had once referred to Callum as the Lesser Wren in what he clearly thought was a private conversation. The station's acoustics were better than Draven realized. Callum had laughed about it later, alone in his quarters, because laughing was easier than the alternative. That was his thing. Jokes, humor, deflection through comedy. If you're busy being funny, nobody notices you're drowning. Declan never needed jokes. Declan spoke plainly, lived plainly, and everyone loved him for it. Callum spoke in punchlines, lived behind a smile, and everyone tolerated him for it. Tolerated was fine. Tolerated kept you in the room. And staying in the room was all Callum needed because somewhere in the middle of subsection 47, buried under reciprocal tariff adjustments and quantum shipping regulations, there was a trade agreement that could change everything for both species. Declan started that work. Callum was going to finish it, even if it killed him, which given the quality of Valorian coffee, it probably would. Princess Seraphina stood at the holo display, and Callum forgot about subsection 47. He'd been working with her for 8 months now. 8 months of 12-hour sessions and diplomatic sparring and arguments so precise they felt choreographed. And he still wasn't used to looking at her. Not because she was alien. He'd gotten past that in the first week. Valorians were humanoid enough that the differences registered as variations rather than strangeness. Taller, more graceful, fingers with an extra joint that their evolutionary biologists trace back to arboreal ancestors. No. The reason Callum wasn't used to looking at Seraphina was simpler than xenobiology. She was beautiful. Not beautiful in the way diplomats describe things aesthetically notable or possessing distinctive features. Beautiful in the way that made your brain stutter, made your prepared remarks evaporate, made you forget what you were going to say and then forget that you'd forgotten. Her hair was gold, true gold, not blonde, not strawberry. Gold like someone had spun actual sunlight into threads and draped them past her shoulders. It caught the light from the holo display differently than human hair would, shifting, shimmering, moving like it had its own relationship with gravity. Her skin was pale and luminous, almost translucent in certain lighting. Something about Valorian melanin that refracted light instead of absorbing it. In the shifting colors of the star charts she was projecting, she looked like she was glowing from inside. Her ears, long and elegantly tapered, swept back from her temples and came to delicate points that extended past where human ears would end. Silver cuffs wrapped around the upper curves, official markers of her status as air negotiator. Not decorative, she'd explained once. They contained nanoprocessors that recorded everything said in official sessions, transmitted directly to the Valorian Council. She was young, younger than you'd expect for someone carrying the weight of an interstellar negotiation. Her face had the kind of delicate bone structure that made her look almost fragile. Almost. Until she opened her mouth and you realized that the girl with the sun-spun hair and porcelain skin could dismantle your argument so thoroughly you'd need a moment alone to recover your dignity. Callum had once joked that it must be hard to gossip with a government surveillance device clamped to your head. She'd given him a look. The look. The one he'd learned meant she was trying not to laugh. That look, right there, that was the first crack. The first moment Callum realized there was someone underneath the composure. Someone warm and sharp and funny, hiding behind diplomatic perfection. But he hadn't known that then. And even now, 8 months later, he was careful not to think about it too much. Because thinking about it led to feeling about it. And feeling about it led to wanting things that a mid-level diplomatic attaché had no business wanting from alien royalty. So he didn't think about it, except when she stood at the hollow display and his brain went quiet in a way it never did for anything else, which was often, which was becoming a real problem. The Kepler corridor presents unique challenges. Seraphina's voice carried the musical quality that all Valorians had, like they'd evolved with perfect pitch as a default setting. Every word she spoke sounded like it should be accompanied by string instruments. Human vessels navigate by quantum anchor points, while Valorian ships utilize probability wave alignment. The corridor allows both, but not simultaneously in the same spatial coordinates. Ambassador Margot Lindell leaned forward. Sharp eyes, silver hair pulled tight. So we need a traffic control system that operates in both quantum states and probability fields. Essentially, yes. That will cost approximately the GDP of a small moon to construct, Callum interjected, scrolling through financial projections on his tablet, and require technology neither of our civilizations has successfully miniaturized yet. Seraphina turned to him, and there it was, the flash, quick, hidden. A spark of amusement in those deep dark eyes before her diplomatic mask settled back into place. You have alternative suggestions, Diplomat Wren. I'm suggesting we table the traffic control system until Phase 3 and focus on getting the basic agreement ratified. We're talking about installing a stop sign before we've agreed on which side of the road to drive on. Lord Draven, the Valorian advisor with the perpetually constipated expression, made a sound like wind through a cave system. The human delegation continues to trivialize complex matters with inappropriate metaphors. The human delegation continues to use metaphors because we're still waiting for the Valorian delegation to explain why 3 colony worlds need 17 different categories of import restrictions. Callum shot back, but he softened it with a smile. 8 months had taught him exactly how far he could push. The precise distance between diplomatic courtesy and diplomatic incident. He'd mapped that border, lived on it, danced along it like a tightrope walker who found the danger entertaining. Seraphina held up one graceful hand. Perhaps we should break for midday reflection. We've been at this since dawn cycle. 12 hours. They'd been in this room for 12 consecutive hours arguing about trade routes and tariff structures with the kind of intensity usually reserved for hostage negotiations. Callum's brain felt like it had been put through a recycling processor. The room began clearing, advisors gathering data pads, speaking in low tones, and Callum stayed seated, rubbing his temples, contemplating whether the station's medical bay had anything that could cure a headache caused by bureaucratic language. You look like someone explained entropy to you using only interpretive dance. Callum looked up. Seraphina, still standing by the holo display. Entourage gone, almost smiling. Almost. Is that a Valorian saying, or did you just make that up? I've been studying human humor. Was it effective? It was weird, which means you're getting better at it. Callum stood his knees, protesting after hours in chairs designed for people with different leg proportions. How do you do this? You look like you could go another 12 hours without breaking a sweat. Valorians don't sweat. We regulate temperature through increased blood flow to our ears. I know. I've read the cultural briefing materials approximately 600 times. Then why did you ask? Because I meant mentally. How are you not exhausted? Seraphina moved closer, and Callum caught the scent that always accompanied her, something like ozone and frost, and a flower that didn't grow on Earth. Clean, cool, like standing at the edge of a glacier and realizing you've never actually breathed fresh air before. I find the work engaging. You find subsection 47 engaging. I find it important, And I find, she paused. Callum had learned to recognize when she was choosing words carefully. Her eyes would shift just slightly, like she was reading invisible options in the air. The company tolerable. Tolerable. Callum pressed his hand to his chest. Theatrical. I'm putting that on my resume. Company tolerable to alien royalty. Her lips quirked. Almost. You do this deliberately. Do what? Make jokes when discussions become difficult. It's a deflection mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. If I don't joke, I'll start crying about tariff structures. And that's not a great look for humanity's diplomatic corps. He started gathering his things, shoving data pads into his bag, with the organizational skills of someone who'd given up on organization around hour 6. Besides, someone has to balance Lord Draven's aggressive lack of humor. I'm pretty sure he thinks laughter is a threat display. He thinks many human behaviors are threat displays. Your smiling confuses him. Everything confuses him. Last week, he filed a formal complaint because Ambassador Lindell said break a leg before my presentation. Thought she was threatening violence. Seraphina smiled then. Quick, genuine. Before she controlled it, a flash of warmth breaking through ice like sun through winter clouds. And something behind Callum's ribs shifted. Something he refused to name. I explained idioms to him, Seraphina said. He remained skeptical of your species' linguistic consistency. Callum laughed and the sound felt good. Real. After hours of careful diplomatic phrasing, this right here was the part of the assignment he hadn't expected. That he'd actually like her. That her composure would crack occasionally to reveal something sharp and warm underneath. That working with her would become the best part of impossibly long days. Month 2. Callum had been on the station 6 weeks, still finding his footing, still hearing your brother would have at least twice a day. The session had gone 14 hours, some dispute about mineral rights on a contested moon. Callum couldn't remember the details anymore. What he remembered was what came after. The Valorian faction, led by a senior advisor, had rejected 3 consecutive proposals. Not because they were flawed, but because they'd been drafted by the lesser Wren. The implication wasn't subtle. They didn't trust him, didn't think he had the standing to propose anything worth considering. Seraphina had maintained perfect composure throughout. Diplomatic, neutral, her expression revealing nothing. And then after everyone else had left, Callum found himself alone in the corridor, leaning against a wall that pulsed with bioluminescent light, trying to remember why he'd agreed to this assignment. Because Declan would have wanted you to. Except Declan was dead. And dead people don't want things. That's the whole problem with being dead. Footsteps. Light. Almost silent. Valorian footsteps always sounded like someone walking on clouds. Seraphina. Still in her formal robes. Still composed. She stopped beside him. Said nothing for a long moment. Just stood there looking at the same bioluminescent wall he was pretending to find interesting. Are you tired? 3 words. Simple. Unremarkable. Except no one had asked him that. Not once in 6 weeks. Margot asked if he was prepared. The delegation asked if he was competent. Earth Command asked if he was maintaining Declan's framework. Everyone asked if he was performing, functioning, delivering. No one asked if he was tired. Yeah, Callum said, and something in his voice must have sounded different because Seraphina turned to look at him. Really look. Those dark eyes seeing past the jokes and the deflections and the carefully maintained facade of someone who was absolutely fine. Yeah, I'm tired. She didn't offer comfort, didn't say it would get better, didn't compare him to his brother, didn't give advice. She just nodded, once, and stood beside him in the corridor. They stayed like that for 10 minutes, maybe more. Callum lost track. The bioluminescent wall pulsed through its cycle blue to blue again, and neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. It was the first time since arriving on the station that Callum felt like he could breathe without performing, without measuring his words against Declan's ghost, without wondering if the joke he was about to make would land well enough to cover how lost he felt. Seraphina just stood there, present, patient, as if standing in a corridor with a tired human diplomat was exactly where she was supposed to be. When she finally left a soft nod, a turn those silent Valorian footsteps carrying her away, Callum stood alone for another 5 minutes, staring at the wall, thinking about how strange it was that someone could say 3 words and change the temperature of your entire day. Are you tired? Nobody important says that. That's what he told himself afterward, back in his quarters, lying on a bed that was too soft and staring at a ceiling that glowed with ambient starlight. Nobody important says that and means it the way she meant it. Except she did mean it, and that he was beginning to realize was the problem. And that was the beginning, right there. That quiet moment when a princess asked a simple question that no one else thought to ask. Month 4. Callum was arguing with 3 members of his own delegation behind closed doors. The Valorians had proposed a cultural exchange clause that Earth Command considered too generous. They wanted it rejected. Callum wanted it accepted. It's a goodwill gesture. They're offering us access to their educational archives, their medical research. Do you understand what that's worth? We understand the optics, one of the senior advisors had said. It looks like we're making concessions. It looks like we're building trust, which is the entire point of Diplomat Wren. Your brother would have, my brother isn't here. Silence. Heavy. The kind that follows when someone says the thing everyone's been thinking but no one was supposed to say out loud. Callum accepted the cultural exchange clause. Over objections. It was a risk, the kind that could end his career if it went wrong. It didn't go wrong, because Seraphina on the other side had been making the same argument to her own people, fighting for the same clause from the opposite direction. Callum didn't know this until weeks later when Lyra, a young Valorian advisor, friendlier than Draven, kinder than most, mentioned it casually. The princess defended your position to the council when you weren't present. She said your proposal showed genuine understanding of Valorian values. Callum had stared at Lyra, processing. She said more than that, but I believe some of it was meant to remain private. Lyra had smiled knowingly and walked away, leaving Callum standing in a corridor, holding a datapad, feeling something shift inside him like a door opening that he hadn't known was there. Month 6. The 3rd attempt at Valorian coffee had been particularly awful. Tasted like someone had dissolved a battery in lukewarm water and added a hint of regret. Callum had gone back to his quarters, opened the one luxury item he'd brought from Earth, a sealed container of real coffee beans. The good stuff. Dark roast. His mother had sent it because mothers always know what you actually need even when you're 3-star systems away. He brewed a cup, real cup in a real mug, and then he brewed a second and brought it to Seraphina. She'd been in her study, data projections floating around her like a galaxy of information, hair pinned up revealing the elegant line of her neck, the silver cuffs on her ears glinting. What is this coffee? Actual Earth coffee from actual Earth. She'd looked at the mug, then at him, then at the mug again. Why? Because the Valorian version is an affront to beverages everywhere, and nobody should have to suffer through another cup of liquid regret when there's an alternative. She'd taken a sip, and her eyes had closed, just for a moment, and something in her expression had shifted, softened. The composure cracking not into humor this time, but into something gentler. This is wonderful. I know. I didn't know liquid could taste like warmth. That's the saddest thing anyone's ever said to me. And I once heard a grown man cry about subsection 47. She'd laughed, quiet, almost involuntary. And then she'd looked at him with those dark eyes, and Callum had felt it again. That shift, that door, that thing he wasn't supposed to feel. He left the container with her, the whole thing. 2 pounds of Earth's finest dark roast. She never mentioned it to anyone. But Lyra told him later in her casually devastating way that the princess kept it in her private quarters, brewed a cup every evening, and drank it while reviewing the day's negotiations. Callum tried not to think about what that meant. He failed. Month 7. The moment that changed everything. Before the joke, Before the proposal, before any of it, they were in the biodome, late cycle, the artificial trees swaying in manufactured wind, roses that had too many petals, grass that was slightly the wrong shade of green, everything trying hard to be terrestrial and not quite getting there. They'd ended up on a bench looking at stars through the transparent aluminum dome. And Callum told her about Declan. He didn't plan to, didn't mean to. It just happened the way truth sometimes falls out of you when you're tired enough and the person next to you is quiet enough and the stars outside are vast enough to make your problems feel small. My brother was supposed to be here, not me. Seraphina didn't respond, just waited. Declan, he started these negotiations, built the frameworks, established the relationships. He was the one everyone wanted, the brilliant one, the natural. Callum's voice cracked, just slightly, along a line he'd been ignoring for 2 years. He died in transit, navigation malfunction. They told me it was instantaneous, like that's supposed to make it better, like speed makes loss easier. Still Seraphina said nothing, her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes steady on a point in the middle distance. They sent me because I was available, because I knew the files, because losing me wouldn't matter as much if the negotiations failed. He laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh, the kind that has teeth. I've been trying to be him for 8 months, filling his shoes, following his notes, finishing his sentences. And every single day, someone reminds me that I'm the replacement. Silence. Long, full. And then Seraphina did something she'd never done before. She reached out and placed her hand on the bench beside his. Not touching. Close enough to touch if he wanted. Leaving the choice with him. She didn't say it would be okay, didn't say he was doing a good job, didn't say his brother would be proud. She just sat beside him in the quiet and let him hurt. And Callum cried. Not much, not dramatically, just a few tears that escaped the fortress he'd built around his grief running down his face in the artificial starlight, while a princess sat beside him and pretended not to notice. Except she noticed everything. That was the night Callum realized he was in trouble. Not the diplomatic kind. The other kind where you look at someone and something painful and beautiful happens at the same time and you think, oh no, and you know that nothing is ever going to be quite the same. He didn't say anything about it, didn't acknowledge it, packed it away in the same box where he kept his grief and his inadequacy and his fear. But it was there, glowing quietly, impossible to ignore. Month 8, day 1 of the rest of his life. 12 hours. They'd been in the conference room for 12 consecutive hours, arguing about trade routes and tariff structures and cultural exchange programs and shipping regulations and approximately 47 subsections of mind-numbing bureaucratic language. Callum's brain felt like overcooked pasta. His eyes burned. His back ached from chairs designed for people with different spines. Seraphina stood at the hollow display fingers dancing through projected star charts. Still composed. Still perfect. Still looking like she could go another 12 hours without showing any sign of fatigue. Callum watched her and something loosened behind his ribs. 8 months. 8 months of working with this woman. Arguing with her. Making her almost laugh. Learning her tells the way her ears angled forward when she was being earnest. The way her lips quirked when she was holding back a smile. The way she chose her words like a jeweler selecting gems. 8 months of being the best part of each other's impossible days. The session was winding down. Advisors gathering their things. Draven looking constipated as usual. Margot checking her tablet. Callum stood up. His knees protested. His brain protested. Everything protested. And his mouth, as it often did when he was exhausted, operated independently of his better judgment. At this rate, we should just get married and call it a dowry negotiation. Probably simpler than whatever we're trying to accomplish with tariff schedules. He was already turning toward the door, his mind on food, sleep, a shower long enough to forget what reciprocal trade agreements were. Just a joke. Just Callum being Callum. Deflecting exhaustion with humor. He didn't see Seraphina's expression change. Didn't see her straighten something shifting in her posture from diplomatic courtesy to something else entirely. Callum, her voice stopped him. Not Diplomat Wren. Callum. She never used his first name in official sessions. Never in 8 months. Not once. He turned back, and the look on her face made the air leave his lungs. She wasn't smiling, wasn't almost smiling. She was serious in a way that went beyond trade negotiations and diplomatic protocol and everything else that had defined their relationship. Her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that suggested she was making a decision that couldn't be unmade. She looked young, vulnerable, brave. I agree to be yours. Callum Wren. 6 words. 6 words, and the universe split in half. Callum stared at her, his tired brain struggling to process what she just said. Why she was saying it. Why Lord Draven was frozen in the doorway, looking like he'd witnessed a supernova. Why Ambassador Lindell had just dropped her tablet. Why the entire room had gone silent in a way that felt permanent. By the customs of my people, Seraphina continued, her voice steady formal, the voice of a princess making a declaration, not a woman making a confession. And in the presence of these witnesses, I accept your proposal. Callum's brain went offline. Completely. Entirely. Like someone had pulled the power cord. No thoughts, no jokes, no deflections. Just a vast empty space where his higher cognitive functions used to be. The thing about accidentally proposing marriage to alien royalty, Callum discovered, was that nobody had prepared a protocol for it. The Human Diplomatic Corps had extensive guidelines for first contact scenarios, procedures for cultural misunderstandings, a surprisingly detailed manual on what to do if you accidentally insulted someone's religious leader. Nowhere in the entire database was there a section titled, What to Do When Your Joke Becomes a Legally Binding Interstellar Engagement. The conference room erupted into very polite chaos. Valorian advisors clustering in the corner speaking rapidly in their native language, which sounded like wind chimes having an argument. The human delegation forming their own huddle near the door. Margot furious whispering about need to consult with Earth immediately and possible breach of approximately 17 different protocols. And Callum stood in the middle of it all, still holding his bag, still trying to understand how the last 30 seconds of his life had happened. Seraphina remained by the hollow display, composed, hands folded, like she just announced something as mundane as a lunch break. Draven was the first to approach her, long fingers moving in agitation. Your Highness, surely you cannot mean to... I have spoken, in the presence of witnesses, during an official state negotiation. That tone the one she used when she was done discussing something. The words are recorded. The acceptance is valid. But he was clearly joking. Was he? Seraphina turned those dark eyes on Callum, and he felt pinned, examined, every layer of deflection stripped away. Diplomat Wren, were you joking? Every person in the room turned to look at him. Oh no, oh no, no, no. His mouth opened, but his brain hadn't caught up. Was he joking? Yes. Obviously yes. Absolutely 100% yes. Except, Seraphina was looking at him with an expression that suggested the answer to that question mattered significantly more than he'd realized when he'd made the stupid joke in the first place. Didn't. Callum ran his hand through his hair, the gesture he defaulted to when stressed, which meant he'd been doing it approximately every 6 minutes for the past 8 months. Seraphina, I wasn't actually proposing marriage. You know that, right? Something flickered in her expression, too quick to identify, gone before he could name it. In Valorian culture, proposals made during official state business carry particular weight. They are witnessed, recorded, considered more binding than private proposals because they demonstrate willingness to merge not just lives, but political interests. Margot had pushed through the crowd and now stood at Callum's elbow, radiating fury. Princess Seraphina. With all respect, Diplomat Wren was clearly speaking casually. Human linguistic patterns often include hyperbolic statements for comedic effect. I am aware of human linguistic patterns. And there was an edge to Seraphina's voice now, steel beneath silk. I have spent 8 months studying them. I have learned to distinguish between Diplomat Wren's various forms of humor, his deflection tactics, and his moments of genuine sentiment poorly disguised as jokes. Callum blinked. You've been analyzing my jokes. I analyze everything. It is my function as air negotiator. Give us the room, Callum said. Absolutely not, Margot started. Ambassador, with respect, I need to talk to Princess Seraphina alone. Whatever this is, it's between us first. Whatever this is could have interstellar implications, which is why we need to figure it out before 17 different advisors turn it into an incident. He looked at Margot, trying to convey everything that he understood, the stakes, that he wasn't being reckless, that he just needed 5 minutes to understand what was happening. Please. Margot studied him for a long moment, calculating, measuring, then nodded. 5 minutes, Wren. Don't make any more jokes. The room cleared slowly, advisors filing out with backward glances. Draven lingered, longest shooting Seraphina, a look Callum couldn't interpret before he finally left. The door sealed with a soft hiss of atmospheric locks. Silence. Callum and Seraphina, the massive conference table between them like a neutral zone. So, Callum said, this is awkward. Your ability to understate situations is remarkable. It's a gift, right up there with accidentally proposing marriage to people I work with. He moved around the table, closing distance. Seraphina stood still, watching him approach, her dark eyes tracking his movement the way they track data projections. Seraphina, help me understand. Did you do this because of some legal loophole? Or did you actually, do you... He couldn't finish. The sentence was too enormous, too real. Seraphina was quiet, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's edge. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. In Valorian culture, we do not joke about marriage. When someone proposes even casually, it is understood as testing whether genuine interest might be reciprocated. We use humor to approach serious topics because it allows for retreat if the answer is unfavorable. She looked up at him. When you joked about marrying me, I understood it as you finally indicating that you might see me as more than a diplomatic counterpart. I have been waiting for such an indication for 3 months. Callum's brain stuttered. Hard. 3 months. You've been waiting. I am heir negotiator to the Valorian throne. I cannot simply express personal interest in a human diplomat. It would be inappropriate, possibly harmful to the negotiations. But if you expressed interest first, even through humor, it would give me permission to respond. Her hand stilled on the table. Your joke gave me that permission. I took it. By accepting a proposal I didn't actually make. By accepting the feeling underneath the proposal you were afraid to actually make. Direct hit. Callum felt it land somewhere vital. Tell me I misread the situation, Seraphina said. And now he could hear it underneath the composure, underneath the diplomatic precision, fear. Actual, genuine fear. Tell me the past 8 months meant nothing beyond professional obligation. Tell me you feel nothing when we spend 12 hours arguing about shipping regulations, and somehow it's the best part of your day. Callum opened his mouth to deny it, to laugh it off, to make another joke, but the words wouldn't come, because she was right. Somewhere between month 2 and month 8, between arguments about tariff structures and walks through the biodome, pointing out stars to each other between terrible coffee and quiet corridors, and a night when he'd cried and she just sat beside him, something had shifted. He looked forward to their sessions, made jokes specifically to see her try not to smile, started drinking terrible Valorian coffee because she'd mentioned once that she appreciated the cultural effort. This is insane, Callum said. That is not an answer. I don't have an answer. I have a brain that's been arguing about trade regulations for 12 hours and is now trying to process that. An actual princess just accepted my fake marriage proposal and apparently has feelings I didn't know about. Now you know about them. Seraphina moved closer, close enough that Callum could see the silver threads woven through her hair, the way her ears curved back gracefully, the faint luminescence of her skin. The question is what you feel. And then she told him the rest. There is something else you should know. Her voice changed, harder now, the softness from moments ago retreating behind something that sounded like survival. The Valorian Council has been negotiating a political marriage for me with Lord Vexor. Callum knew the name. Lord Vexor, leader of the isolationist faction that wanted the trade agreement to fail, that believed Valorian should cut ties with humanity entirely. A man twice Seraphina's age. Cold. Calculating. The kind of political operator who treated people as chess pieces. The arrangement would be finalized within the month if no alternative engagement existed. The pieces rearranged themselves in Callum's head. Click, click, click. Your proposal gave me an alternative, Seraphina said. The room felt smaller suddenly, walls closer, air thinner. So, Callum said very carefully, am I your escape plan or am I actually both? The word landed between them. Honest, brutal. Both. And I'm sorry for that. Her composure cracked just slightly, a fracture running through perfect porcelain. Her voice wavered, for the first time in 8 months. I have genuine feelings for you. I've had them for months, watching you, learning you, wanting to tell you and being unable to because of protocol and politics and a throne I never asked for. She steadied herself. But I also saw your joke as an opportunity to escape a marriage that would have destroyed me. And I took it, selfishly, without giving you a choice. She met his eyes. So yes, you are both love and escape, truth and desperation. And you're telling me this now, because you deserve to know, all of it, not just the romantic parts. Callum stood very still, processing. His brain doing something it rarely did, working without the safety net of humor. She could have hidden it, could have let him believe it was purely romantic. A fairy tale princess falls for diplomat. Simple, clean. Instead, she gave him the mess, the complicated, the real. Vexor, Callum said finally. What happens if I withdraw, if I say it was just a joke? Vexor gets what he wants, the marriage, control over the negotiation, and eventually the collapse of the trade agreement, because that was always his goal. And you, I become a political asset married to a man who sees me as a strategic acquisition. Her jaw tightened. My mother warned me about men like that. Before she died, she said, Seraphina stopped, swallowed. She said, don't choose someone who loves your crown. Choose someone who sees you when you're not wearing it. The quote hung in the air, carrying the weight of a dead mother's wisdom and a living daughter's fear. And you think that's me, Callum said. The guy who makes too many jokes and drinks terrible coffee and can't get through subsection 47 without wanting to scream. You asked me if I was tired, month 2, in a corridor after a session that went badly for you. Seraphina's voice was barely a whisper. No one asked me that. No one sees past the title, past the composure. You did. Something hurt behind Callum's eyes, physically, like his whole body had decided to remind him he was alive. She's royalty. You're a replacement diplomat. She's Valorian. You're human. She's brilliant and beautiful and carries the weight of an interstellar nation on her shoulders. And you're a guy who hides behind jokes because feeling things directly is too terrifying. But she chose you, not Declan's ghost, not the brilliant brother, not the perfect diplomat everyone wished you were. She chose the version of you that makes bad jokes and cries in biodomes and brings coffee to princesses because it's the only language of care you know. She chose you, and maybe for the first time in your life, that's enough. I'm not going to withdraw, Callum said. Seraphina's eyes widened, just slightly. I'm not saying I have answers. I'm not saying I know what I feel or what this is or how any of this works. He ran his hand through his hair again. But you took a risk, a huge, terrifying, possibly insane risk. And you were honest with me about why, even the ugly parts. He looked at her, really looked, past the golden hair and the glowing skin and the silver ear cuffs, at the person underneath, tired, scared, brave. The least I can do is not run. Seraphina exhaled, long shaking like she'd been holding her breath for 3 months and only just realized. You might regret this. I might, probably will, multiple times. Lord Vexer will challenge us. I know. The arbitration council, the political fallout, my family, Seraphina. She stopped. I've been living in my brother's shadow for 2 years, trying to be someone I'm not, failing at it every single day. And you're the first person who saw me. Not him, me, the real one, the messy one. He didn't touch her, didn't close the remaining distance. That felt too soon, too much. But he held her gaze, and in that gaze was everything he couldn't say yet, everything he wasn't ready to name. So yeah, let's do this. Whatever this is, let's find out. Seraphina nodded, and her mask cracked fully for one moment, a smile breaking through that was real and warm and radiant, like sunrise on a planet where the sun was made of gold. Then she gathered herself, straightened, became the princess again. But Callum had seen it, that smile, that unguarded moment. And he knew with the certainty of someone who'd spent 8 months learning another person's tales that whatever happened next, whatever Vexer threw at them, whatever the arbitration council decided, whatever the galaxy had in store, that smile was worth fighting for. Outside through the observation windows, Valindra turned slowly in space. 3 moons hanging like pearls against the void. Auroras in impossible colors. And somewhere on that station, a diplomat who made too many jokes and a princess who analyzed his jokes had just agreed to do something either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Definitely both. The thing about storms, they don't announce themselves. Not really. Oh, sure, the sky darkens, the wind shifts, the air gets that electric taste like the universe is licking its lips. But the actual storm, the part that tears the roof off your life and rearranges everything you thought was nailed down, that comes quiet, a whisper, a document, a recording that isn't what it seems. Callum Wren was about to learn this the hard way. 3 days after the proposal that wasn't a proposal, 3 days after 6 words split his life into before and after, Callum sat in the station's biodome surrounded by engineered plant life that was trying very hard to look terrestrial and kept failing in small ways. Roses with too many petals, grass that was slightly the wrong shade of green, trees swaying without wind, responding to some internal rhythm programmed by botanists who'd never actually stood in a forest. Seraphina sat beside him on a bench designed for human proportions, too short for her longer legs. She'd changed out of formal robes into something simpler, though still elegant enough to make Callum feel underdressed in his standard diplomatic corps uniform. They'd been sitting in silence for 10 minutes, which was approximately 9 minutes and 50 seconds longer than Callum had ever gone without making a joke since puberty. "You're being quiet," Seraphina observed. "I'm thinking." That explains the concerning expression. She glanced at him, a hint of a smile. "You look like someone told you the universe is actually a simulation running on outdated hardware." "Hey, you're getting really good at the weird analogies thing." "I practice." "Did you practice that one?" "No, improvised." He almost smiled. Almost. "I'm quiet because I'm trying to figure out what happens next. Vexer, the arbitration challenge, your family, my delegation. There are about 47 ways this goes wrong, and I can only see 3 ways it goes right. That's more than 0. Barely." Seraphina shifted on the bench, pulling one leg underneath her in a way that would have looked uncomfortable for a human but seemed natural for her. "I should apologize. I put you in an impossible situation." "You mentioned that. I'll mention it again, because it deserves repeating." "Seraphina." Callum turned to face her fully. "I make one joke and suddenly I'm engaged to alien royalty. If I back out, I'm committing fraud and destroying interstellar relations. If I stay in, I'm married to a princess while fighting off a political coup from a man who probably wants me dead." He paused. "Actually, does Vexer want me dead?" He would prefer you remove from the negotiations. That's not a no. He will likely challenge the engagement through legal means rather than physical ones. Likely, she said likely. Seraphina's lips twitched. I could withdraw the acceptance. Can you actually do that? No, but I could claim temporary mental instability brought on by prolonged exposure to human negotiation tactics. Her expression was perfectly serious. It would humiliate me publicly, end my career as air negotiator, destroy my standing with the council, but it would release you from obligation. Callum stared at her. You'd actually do that. I would rather you be free and comfortable than bound to me unwillingly. And there it was, the thing that kept catching him off guard about Seraphina. Underneath the diplomatic precision and the royal composure, there was someone who would burn down her own life before letting it cage someone else. Her mother's daughter, the woman who'd said, choose someone who sees you. Nobody's withdrawing anything, Callum said. We're in this, together, whatever comes. You keep saying that because you keep trying to give me an exit I don't want. She looked at him then, long, searching, those dark eyes reading him the way she read diplomatic proposals, line by line, looking for hidden clauses. Okay, she said, quiet, almost fragile. Together. Lord Vexor filed his challenge with the Arbitration Council on day 4. Callum had been expecting it, had stayed up the previous night reading every Valorian legal precedent about marriage customs, engagement disputes, fraudulent proposals, his eyes crossing over terminology that seemed designed to be impenetrable. But he hadn't expected the scope. Vexor didn't just challenge the engagement. That would have been simple, manageable. No, Vexor went bigger. He filed a formal accusation of psychological manipulation, claiming that Callum had deliberately used humor as a tool to gain emotional influence over Princess Seraphina. That 8 months of jokes and deflections and carefully placed kindnesses were not genuine, but calculated. Strategic. A human diplomat using alien cultural blind spots to advance Earth's negotiating position. The document was 37 pages long, meticulously researched. Every joke Callum had ever made, every casual conversation, every coffee delivery reframed as evidence of systematic manipulation. Callum read it in his quarters, alone, and felt sick, not because the accusations were true, but because they took every genuine moment he'd shared with Seraphina and made them sound predatory, made his humor sound like a weapon, made his kindness sound like a trap, made him sound like exactly the kind of person he'd always been afraid of being, the replacement who'd use any advantage, even someone's feelings. Lyra was the one who brought him up to speed on the political dimension. Vexor leads the isolationist faction, she said, standing in his quarters, hands clasped. He has opposed the trade agreement from the beginning. Not publicly, he's too smart for that. But behind closed doors, he's been working to undermine negotiations for months. And the arranged marriage to Seraphina. Political consolidation. If Vexor marries into the royal family, he gains direct influence over trade policy. The agreement would be dead within a year. Slowly. Quietly. Death by 1,000 amendments. And my accidental engagement just blew up his plan. It didn't just blow up his plan, it humiliated him. In Valorian culture, having an intended match choose someone else, especially a human, in a public session. Lyra paused. Diplomatic. It's a significant loss of face. So he's not just fighting a legal battle. He's fighting for his political survival, which makes him dangerous. A man with nothing to lose will do anything. Yeah, I've read that book. Didn't like the ending. The first blow came from a direction Callum didn't expect. Not from Vexor, not from the Valorian Council, not from some alien legal proceeding he barely understood. From home. Ambassador Margot Lindell appeared at his door at 0600 station time. Early. Before the corridors filled with diplomatic staff. Before anyone would see her entering his quarters. That alone told Callum this was bad. Margot didn't do early morning visits for good news. She stood in his doorway, silver hair pulled back, face composed, but her eyes had that particular flatness that meant she was delivering orders she personally disagreed with. Earth Council sent a directive last night. Callum's stomach dropped. Directive, not suggestion, not recommendation. They want you to withdraw from the engagement. The words landed like stones in still water. They want, withdraw, voluntarily, publicly state that the proposal was made in jest, accept whatever diplomatic consequences follow. The diplomatic consequences would be a fraud charge and permanent exile from Valorian space, plus the collapse of 2 years of trade negotiations. They're aware. Then why? Because if you marry Seraphina, you become embedded in the Valorian royal family. Margot closed the door behind her, lowered her voice. Earth Council believes that compromises your objectivity as a negotiator. You can't represent human interest while being legally bound to the other side's heir. It made sense on paper, in the sterile mechanical way that political decisions always made sense when you stripped out the human element. There's more, Callum said. Not a question. He could see it in Margot's face. She hesitated. A rare thing, Margot Lindell did not hesitate. She calculated, decided, acted. Hesitation was for people who hadn't already weighed every option. There are members of Earth Council who see an opportunity in this situation. Vexer has made overtures through back channels, suggesting that if you're removed from negotiations, he would be willing to negotiate a separate agreement, one more favorable to Earth. More favorable how? Resource extraction rights on the 3 colony worlds, expanded access to Valorian technology, reduced cultural exchange requirements. Callum went cold. That's not a trade agreement, that's exploitation. Those colony worlds have indigenous populations. I'm aware of what it is, and Earth Council is actually considering. I didn't say I agreed with it. Margot's voice sharpened, a blade hidden in silk. I said they sent a directive. There's a difference. Callum sat on the edge of his bed, processing. What do you think I should do? Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat across from him in the single chair his quarters provided. And when she spoke, her voice was different. Not the ambassador, just Margot, the woman who'd known his brother, who'd watched Callum struggle for 8 months. I think your brother would have followed orders. I know. And I think that's exactly why you shouldn't. Callum looked at her, surprised. Declan was brilliant, Margot continued. But he followed the system. Even when the system was wrong, he trusted institutions more than instincts. She paused. You trust people, specific people. That woman out there, the one with the composure that could stop a war. You trust her. I do. Then trust that instinct, because the system is telling you to abandon someone who needs you, and systems don't have consciences. She stood, smoothed her jacket, became the ambassador again. You have 48 hours before Earth Council expects a response. I'll delay as long as I can. She stopped at the door. But Callum, whatever you decide, you need to understand. If you stay in this engagement, you're on your own. I won't be able to protect you, not officially. The door closed behind her, and Callum sat alone, in a room that was too soft on a station that was too far from home, trying to figure out when his life had become a choice between the person he loved and the future he'd been building. Wait, the person he loved. When did that happen? When did tolerable company become the person I can't imagine walking away from? He pressed his palms against his eyes until colors bloomed in the darkness. It happened in a corridor. Month 2, when she asked if he was tired. It happened with a coffee delivery. Month 6, when her eyes closed and she said she didn't know liquid could taste like warmth. It happened in a biodome. Month 7, when he cried and she stayed. It happened 1,000 small ways, each one building on the last like sediment layers of moments, compressing into something solid, something real, something he was terrified to name because naming it made it breakable. Seraphina went home, not permanently, A 3-day visit to Valindra's surface required by protocol. The royal family had been informed of the engagement. She had to present herself. Explain. Callum couldn't go with her. The surface of Valindra wasn't cleared for human visitors during political disputes. Too many security concerns. So he waited on the station, in the biodome, drinking the last of his real coffee because the terrible Valorian kind reminded him of her. And he didn't want to be reminded because being reminded made him feel things, and feeling things made him vulnerable. And vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Lyra told him about Seraphina's visit afterward. In careful pieces, the way you deliver news when you're not sure how much the other person can handle. The king Seraphina's father had said nothing, sat on his throne face carved from the same stone the palace was built from, neither approving nor disapproving, just watching, measuring, a ruler calculating political outcomes while his daughter stood before him asking for permission to love someone. Muriel, Seraphina's younger sister, had been different. Muriel was everything Seraphina wasn't. Loud where Seraphina was quiet. Blunt where Seraphina was diplomatic. She studied quantum mechanics at the Valorian Academy of Sciences, had no patience for politics, even less patience for pretense. She'd pulled Seraphina aside after the formal audience into a garden overlooking the crystal valleys where plants glowed with their own bioluminescence, and the air tasted like copper and starlight. Do you love him direct, no preamble, no softening? I have strong feelings. I didn't ask about feelings. I asked about love softening. I have strong feelings. I didn't ask about feelings. I asked about love. It's complicated. It's not. Either you love him or you love the idea of not being married to Vexer. Those are different things, and you need to know which one this is before you destroy both your lives finding out. Seraphina had gone quiet, the way she always went quiet when someone asked a question she didn't have a prepared answer for. Because here's what I see, Muriel continued. I see my sister who has been performing since the day Mother died, who hasn't cried in 6 years, who holds everything so tight that nothing gets in and nothing gets out. And suddenly there's this human, this diplomat with his jokes and his coffee, and you're willing to blow up your entire political future for him. That's not, either it's love or it's desperation, and both are terrifying, but only one is worth fighting for. Seraphina hadn't answered, not right away. She'd looked out over the crystal valleys instead, watching the bioluminescent plants pulse in their slow rhythms. Thinking about their mother, about the last time she'd stood in this garden before the illness took everything, when Alindra had held her hand and said those words that had become the compass of Seraphina's adult life. Choose someone who sees you when you're not wearing your crown. At the time, Seraphina had been 15. She hadn't understood. She'd thought her mother was being poetic the way mothers are when they know their time is running short and they're trying to compress a lifetime of wisdom into whatever months remain. But standing in that garden 11 years later, with Muriel's question hanging in the air like smoke, Seraphina understood. She understood because she'd spent 8 months sitting across a negotiating table from a man who'd never once, not once, looked at her crown before he looked at her. I think it might be love, she'd finally said to Muriel, but I'm not sure I know what that feels like. No one ever taught me. Muriel had been quiet then, a rare thing for her, and when she'd spoken, her voice was softer than usual. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard you say. And I once heard you give a 40-minute presentation on tariff structures without showing a single emotion. Seraphina had almost laughed. Almost. Maybe that's what love is, Muriel had added. Not knowing what it feels like, but being terrified of losing it anyway. That silence, Lyra said, had lasted a very long time after that. Day 12. It had been 8 days since Callum refused to answer Earth Council's directive, 8 days of silence from both Earth and Seraphina, who had returned from Valindra, but kept to her quarters attending negotiations through remote link rather than in person. 8 days of Callum reviewing legal precedents, alone, eyes burning, half a cup of cold coffee beside him. The chime at his door was unexpected. Lyra, standing in the corridor, face pale, even for a Valorian. You need to see something. She handed him a data pad. On it, a recording, audio, Timestamped 3 days ago during a private meeting between Callum and Ambassador Lindell. Callum hit play. His own voice filled the room. The engagement is just a move to hold my position in the negotiations. He stared at the data pad. Those were his words, his voice, unmistakably. Except that's not what he'd said. The memory surfaced sharp and clear. He'd been talking to Margot about Earth Council's concerns about how some people viewed the engagement as political maneuvering. And he'd said, some people will think the engagement is just a move to hold my position in the negotiations. But that's not what this is. That's what he'd said. The full sentence with the rebuttal, the denial, the part that mattered. Someone had cut it. Surgically. Precisely. Leaving only the damning half. Where did this come from? It's everywhere. Lyra's voice was tight. Transmitted to every data terminal on the station. Every Valorian advisory office. Every member of the delegation. Everyone has heard it. Vexer. Obviously. Though he'll claim it was leaked anonymously. And Seraphina has she... Lyra's expression answered before her words did. She received it an hour ago, along with a personal message from Vexer suggesting she reconsider the engagement before further humiliation occurred. Callum was already moving. Out the door, down the corridor, data pad still clutched in his hand, feet carrying him faster than dignity should allow. The station's corridors were long, bioluminescent, beautiful in a way he couldn't appreciate right now because somewhere on this station, a woman was listening to a recording that sounded exactly like the man she trusted, proving he couldn't be trusted. He reached her quarters, pressed the chime. No answer. Pressed again. Nothing. Seraphina. Silence, heavy, full. He pressed his hand against the door. Cool metal. Unyielding. Seraphina, please, that recording is cut. It's manipulated. I never said those words, not like that, not meaning what it sounds like. Nothing. But a sound. Faint. Almost inaudible through the thick door and the atmospheric seals. A sound Callum recognized because he'd made it himself in corridors, in biodomes and quiet rooms when no one was watching. She was crying, his throat closed, his vision blurred. Seraphina, who hadn't cried in 6 years according to Mirel, who held everything so tight that nothing got in and nothing got out, who wore composure like armor and perfection like a shield, she was crying. Alone. In her room. Because of words she thought he'd said. And the worst part, the part that made Callum want to tear through the door with his bare hands, was that he understood why she believed it. Because her whole life people had told her one thing and meant another. Her father silent calculating. The council manipulating. Vexer scheming. Everyone around her playing games, wearing masks, saying the right words while thinking the wrong thoughts. And she'd let him in. Past the armor. Past the composure. She'd told him about Vexer, about her mother, about the loneliness. She'd accepted his proposal in front of witnesses. Put her entire future on the line. And now a recording. His voice. His words. Telling her it was all strategy. Of course she believed it. In her experience, that's what people did. They performed kindness until it stopped being useful. Callum pressed his forehead against the door. I know you can hear me. His voice quiet now. Not performing, not deflecting, not making jokes. And I know why you don't want to open this door. Because in your experience, people lie. They say beautiful things and mean ugly ones. And you've spent your whole life being careful because of that. He paused, breathing. The recording is fake, cut, manipulated. The full sentence, the real one, was me saying that some people would think the engagement was strategy. But it wasn't. That was the whole point. I was defending us, not dismissing us. Silence. But I understand if you don't believe me. Because believing me means trusting someone again. And the last time you trusted someone, apparently, he turned out to be exactly the kind of person everyone warned you about. He closed his eyes, the door cold against his skin. I'm not going to stand here and beg. That's not what this is. I just want you to know one thing. A breath. Come to the hearing. When it happens, listen to what I say. Watch my face when I say it. And if after that you still think I was using you, I'll walk away. I'll accept the fraud charge. I'll leave Valorian space, and you'll never have to see me again. Nothing. But if there's any part of you, any part at all, that remembers a corridor on month 2 and a coffee delivery on month 6 and a night in the biodome, when I told you about my brother and you just sat there and let me be broken without trying to fix me, his voice gave way, just for a second. If any part of you remembers that and thinks maybe, just maybe, it was real. He pulled back from the door, stood up straight, wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then I'll see you at the hearing. He walked away, down the bioluminescent corridor past windows showing stars that didn't care about any of this. Behind the door in her quarters, Seraphina sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, hair falling like a curtain around her face. In her hands, a container of earth coffee, dark roast, the one he'd given her on month 6. She pressed it against her chest and kept crying. Day 14. Callum's world collapsed. Not dramatically, not cinematically. It collapsed the way real things collapse, quietly through official channels in carefully worded communications. Ambassador Margot Lindell stood in his quarters, her face set in that expression Callum had come to dread, the one that said, "I tried. Earth Council has withdrawn official support for your position." The words didn't register at first, like hearing a language you almost understand but not quite. Withdrawn. You are no longer recognized as a diplomatic representative of Earth in the Valorian trade negotiations. Effective immediately. They can't. They can, and they have. Margot's voice was steady, professional, but her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The directive cites conflict of interest due to your personal involvement with Princess Seraphina. You retain your rank and your commission. You're welcome to return to Earth on the next available transport. But you have no authority, no delegation backing, no legal standing in any official proceedings. The hearing, Vexer's challenge, I'm supposed to, you'll be attending as a private citizen. No counsel, no diplomatic support, no institutional protection. Callum sat down, not because he chose to, because his legs made the decision for him. Margot, I fought this. Her composure cracked just a fraction, enough for Callum to see the woman underneath the ambassador. I fought it for 2 days, called in every favor I had. It wasn't enough. Vexer's back channel offer was too attractive. Earth Council wants the resource extraction deal, and you're in the way. So they're throwing me to the wolves. They're making a strategic calculation. You're one diplomat. The resource deal is worth billions. It's exploitation. Those colony worlds. I know what it is. Margot's voice broke, actually broke like glass on stone. I know, and I'm sorry, and I can't help you anymore. Not officially, not publicly. She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, Declan would have followed orders, would have withdrawn, would have gone home and filed a protest through proper channels and waited for the system to correct itself. And the system wouldn't have corrected itself, because systems protect systems, not people. She left, the door closing softly behind her, and Callum sat in the silence, alone, truly alone in a way he hadn't been since the day they told him Declan was dead. No delegation, no ambassador, no backing, no authority. A private citizen on an alien station facing an arbitration hearing against one of the most powerful political figures in Valorian society, with the woman he loved refusing to open her door. There it was again, that word love sneaking in when he wasn't guarding the gates. Except maybe it was time to stop guarding the gates. Maybe the whole problem, the whole massive life-ruining problem, was that he'd spent his life building walls. Humor instead of honesty, jokes instead of vulnerability, performance instead of presence. Declan hadn't needed walls. Declan walked through the world with his heart open and visible, and people loved him for it. And then Declan died. And Callum had looked at his brother's open heart and thought that's what happens when you don't protect yourself. So he'd built walls, higher, thicker, lined with jokes and deflections, and a smile that said, I'm fine when nothing was fine. And then a princess had looked at those walls, and instead of trying to tear them down, she just sat beside them. In a corridor, in a biodome, in 12-hour sessions where she let him be himself, walls and all. And slowly, so slowly, he hadn't noticed he'd started dismantling them from the inside. Night before the hearing, the biodome, late cycle, the artificial trees doing their windless swaying. Callum sat on the bench, their bench, the one that was too short for Valorian legs, holding a cup of coffee. Real coffee. The last of his supply. His mother wasn't sending more. Earth Council had restricted personal shipments to Valorian space. One more small cruelty in a list that was getting longer. He thought about Declan. Not the golden boy, not the brilliant diplomat, not the ghost everyone compared him to, but the real Declan, the one who left his socks on the bathroom floor, who burned toast every single morning for 27 years, and never learned to use a timer, who called their mother every Sunday without fail. Even from deep space, even when the signal delay was 40 minutes each way. The real Declan, who was good and kind and dead. I'm not you, Callum said to the empty biodome. I'm never going to be you. I make bad jokes. I hide behind humor. I fell in love with an alien princess because she asked me if I was tired. And now I'm sitting alone on a space station, about to face an arbitration hearing with no lawyer, no backup, and no idea what I'm doing. Artificial wind pushed through artificial leaves. But here's the thing, you followed the system, and the system got you killed. Navigation malfunction, routine transport. You trusted the process and the process failed. He took a sip of coffee. Last cup. Better make it count. I'm not going to follow the system. Not this time. The system wants me to walk away, withdraw, go home, be the lesser Wren one more time. Another sip. The coffee was perfect, hot and bitter and real. But she chose me, not you. Me, the messy one. She saw through all of it and chose what she found underneath. He set the cup down, empty now. So tomorrow I'm going to stand in front of that council, alone, no diplomatic immunity, no prepared statements, no safety net. And I'm going to tell the truth, not the diplomatic truth, not the carefully worded subsection 47 truth, the real truth, the kind that doesn't have a safety clause. His hands were shaking. He noticed distantly, I'm going to tell them I love her. The words hung in the artificial air among the artificial trees under artificial stars, and they were the most real thing Callum had ever said. I'm terrified, he added, because honesty once started was hard to stop. Terrified that she won't come, that Vexer will win, that the recording convinced her. A shaky breath. But I'm more terrified of not trying, of walking away, of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd just been brave enough to say what I actually felt instead of hiding it inside a joke. He sat with that for a while. The biodome's environmental systems cycling through their programmed weather, a slight temperature drop to simulate evening, the lights dimming to something approximating dusk. Somewhere in the station's walls, machines were creating a sunset that had never existed on any real planet. Callum thought about his mother, about the call he hadn't made in 3 weeks because he didn't know how to explain any of this. Hey Mom, I accidentally proposed to an alien princess, and now I might be exiled from an entire star system. But the good news is, the coffee here is slightly better than last month. She'd laugh. His mother always laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. Especially the bad ones. Maybe that's where he'd learned it, the idea that humor could be a bridge between people. That making someone laugh was a form of love. Declan had gotten his directness from their father. Callum had gotten his humor from their mother. Two different languages for the same thing, I care about you, and I don't know how to say it simply. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that Declan's way was better. Not that speaking plainly was superior to speaking in punchlines, but that both were attempts at the same impossible task, reaching across the space between one person and another and hoping your hand finds theirs in the dark. He stood up, legs steady enough, heart hammering. So that's the plan. Stand up, tell the truth, hope it's enough. He looked at the empty bench, where Seraphina had sat month after month, letting him be broken, letting him be funny, letting him be himself. It has to be enough. The night stretched on. Callum didn't sleep. Couldn't. His mind running scenarios and counter-arguments in all the ways this could go wrong. And underneath all of it, like a current beneath ice, one thought. Will she come? He'd asked her to through a closed door with nothing to offer but words she had every reason not to believe. Will she come? He didn't know. And that uncertainty, that not knowing, was worse than any trade negotiation, any tariff structure, any subsection. Because you could negotiate with logic, with data, with carefully constructed arguments. You couldn't negotiate with someone's broken trust. 3 hours before the hearing, Callum stood in front of his quarter-small mirror, adjusting a uniform he no longer had the authority to wear. He wore it anyway because it was the only formal clothing he had, and because showing up to fight for your life in casual wear seemed like the wrong message. He looked at himself, really looked. Not the diplomat, not Declan's brother, not the deflection artist, just Callum, tired, scared, in love with someone who might not show up. Okay, he told the mirror. Let's go be honest. How hard can it be? The mirror didn't answer, which was probably for the best, because the honest answer was impossibly hard. The hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than replacing Declan. Harder than 8 months of diplomatic combat. Harder than standing outside a closed door and speaking truth to someone who'd stop listening. But he was going to do it anyway. Because somewhere in a room he couldn't enter, a princess was holding a container of coffee and deciding whether to believe in one more person. And Callum figured if nothing else, he owed her a reason to. The arbitration council chamber was designed to make you feel small. Callum was certain of this because the Valorians were an advanced civilization and they didn't build things by accident. Every crystal, every floating platform, every angle of refracted light intentional. And the intention here was clear: you are insignificant. The law is vast. Behave accordingly. The walls were carved from single massive crystals, floor to ceiling, translucent, alive with light that moved in response to sound waves. Every word spoken in this chamber became visible, rippling through the crystal in patterns of gold and violet and colors. Callum couldn't name colors that didn't exist on Earth, which meant that when you lied, the crystals knew. Not literally, probably, but the effect was psychological. Watching your words turn into light, watching them ripple outward, permanent, inescapable. It made you want to be careful about what you said. 3 elder arbiters sat on platforms that floated exactly 1 meter above the ground, because apparently even furniture needed to be dramatic when you were deciding the fate of interstellar relationships. The central arbiter was a woman named Thesara, elderly, silver bands covering both ears so densely they looked like armor. Her face had heard every lie ever invented and was tired of all of them. She looked at Callum the way a mountain looks at weather-patient, immovable, utterly unimpressed. The gallery was full. Valorian officials, diplomatic observers, members of every faction with a stake in the outcome. Lyra sat in the third row, hands clasped, face tight with worry. Lord Draven was there, looking constipated as always, but also Callum noticed looking conflicted, which was new. Ambassador Margot Lindell sat in the human observation section, officially a neutral observer. Unofficially, she'd squeezed Callum's arm in the corridor outside and whispered, "Don't hold back." And then there was Vexer. Lord Vexer stood on the opposite side of the chamber, tall, silver-haired. Every line of his body communicated certainty power, the absolute confidence of someone who'd never lost an argument because he'd never entered one without already knowing the outcome. He looked at Callum the way you look at an insect on your windshield. Callum stood alone. No delegation behind him. No counsel beside him. No diplomatic authority. No institutional backing. Just a man in a uniform he wasn't authorized to wear in a chamber designed to make him feel small. And one empty seat in the gallery. Third row, left side. Where Seraphina should have been. Wasn't. She didn't come. The thought hit him low and hard in the soft part where you keep the things you're afraid of. She didn't come. He'd asked her through a closed door with everything he had, and she hadn't come. Callum closed his eyes. One breath, two, three. Okay, she didn't come. And that hurts, and it's going to keep hurting for a long time. Maybe forever. But you're here, and the truth doesn't change just because the person you're telling it for isn't in the room. Tell it anyway. He opened his eyes. Arbiter Thesara spoke, her voice filling the crystal chamber like water filling a glass. We convene to examine the validity of the engagement between Princess Seraphina, heir negotiator of the Valorian sovereignty, and Callum Wren, former human diplomatic representative. Former. The word stung like salt on a wound he was pretending didn't exist. Lord Vexer has challenged this union on grounds of fraudulent proposal and psychological manipulation. The challenger may speak first. Vexer stepped forward, and Callum had to admit the man was good. Not good the way Seraphina was good, sharp and honest and precise. Vexer was good the way a blade is good. Elegant, effective, designed for one purpose. Honored arbiters. The evidence is unambiguous. He activated a hollow projection. Callum's voice filled the chamber, the cut recording those damning words stripped of context and truth, bouncing off crystal walls and turning into light. The engagement is just a move to hold my position in the negotiations. The crystals rippled, gold turning to copper, like blood in water. Human diplomat Wren made his so-called proposal in a tone of obvious jest. Vexer continued, calm, measured, every word a scalpel. Following 12 hours of exhausting negotiations, the recording demonstrates he viewed the engagement as strategic positioning, not romantic commitment. He paced, slow, deliberate. But the manipulation goes deeper than one recording. For 8 months, diplomat Wren employed a systematic campaign of emotional infiltration, using humor to lower Princess Seraphina's defenses, using small acts of apparent kindness to build false intimacy, using cultural ignorance as a shield for calculated behavior. Vexer pulled up more recordings. Callum making jokes, Callum delivering coffee, Callum defending Valorian positions. Each moment, each genuine act, reframed and recontextualized, made to look like chess moves instead of human behavior. He studied her, learned her weaknesses, exploited her loneliness, and when the moment was right, he deployed a proposal disguised as a joke, knowing that Valorian culture would interpret it as genuine, knowing that Princess Seraphina's personal circumstances would compel her to accept. Vexer turned to face Callum directly, his eyes cold, satisfied. This man is not a romantic figure. He is a tactician, and Princess Seraphina is his most successful negotiation. The words hung in the crystal air, turning to light, spreading through the walls, making everything glow with the color of accusation. And Callum stood there absorbing it, feeling it settle into his bones. Because the worst lies aren't built from nothing. They're built from truth rearranged, reframed, turned inside out, until they're unrecognizable but still containing enough reality to sound convincing. Yes, he'd studied Seraphina because she fascinated him. Yes, he'd used humor because he was terrified of being direct. Yes, he delivered coffee and remembered details and defended her positions because he cared about her. Take those same actions, remove the caring, replace it with calculation, and suddenly you have Vexer's version 1 that looks exactly the same from the outside, but is hollow on the inside. How do you prove what's in someone's heart? How do you show a courtroom the difference between strategy and love when the actions look identical? Arbiter Thesara turned her ancient eyes to Callum. The respondent may speak. Callum opened his mouth, and the door at the back of the chamber opened. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. The crystals caught new light, changed color, shifted from copper to something warm and bright like sunrise after a long night. Seraphina stood in this doorway, not in formal robes, not in diplomatic regalia, not in the armor of a princess about to make a political statement. She wore something simple, white, flowing, her hair loose around her shoulders unbound, and her ears no silver cuffs. She'd removed them, the recording devices, the council's surveillance, taken them off, which meant everything she was about to say would be unofficial, unrecorded, unprotected. She was here as herself, not air negotiator, not princess, just Seraphina. And she looked, Callum thought, like the bravest person he'd ever seen. Their eyes met across the chamber, across crystal walls and floating platforms, and the wreckage of 2 weeks of silence. She'd been crying, he could tell. The skin around her eyes slightly swollen, barely noticeable to anyone who hadn't spent 8 months learning her face. But she was here. She came. Something in Callum's chest broke open. Not broke like damage broke like dawn, like ice in spring, like a door that's been locked for years finally swinging wide. She came. I invoke the right of sovereign bond. Her voice rang through the chamber, clear, strong, not a tremor. The gallery erupted in whispers. Thesara raised one hand. Silence fell. The right of sovereign bond, Thesara repeated. Princess Seraphina, you understand what you are invoking. I do. Explain for the record. Seraphina stepped forward into the chamber's center, into the light. The crystals around her responded to her voice, turning gold bright gold. In ancient Valorian law, the right of sovereign bond allows an engaged member of the royal family to serve as advocate and defender for their intended partner in any legal proceeding. It supersedes the need for official counsel. It supersedes political authority. She paused. And it requires the invocant to speak only truth. Any falsehood, any deception, any manipulation will be detected by the chamber's resonance crystals and will result in immediate dissolution of the engagement and permanent exile of the invocant from royal status. The chamber went absolutely still because Seraphina had just bet everything, not just the engagement, her title, her position, her future, all of it staked on her ability to speak only truth in a room that could detect lies. If she lied even once, she lost everything. Vexer's composure cracked. Just barely a flicker of something in his eyes that might have been fear. The right of sovereign bond was old, ancient, from an era before political maneuvering had replaced genuine connection. He probably hadn't even known it still existed. And it meant that everything Seraphina was about to say, every word was provably true, verified by crystal technology older than both their civilizations combined. The princess may proceed, Thesara said. And was it Callum's imagination, or did the old arbiter almost smile? Seraphina turned to face the chamber and began dismantling Vexer's case piece by piece, with the precision of someone who'd spent her entire life negotiating, and the passion of someone who'd spent 2 weeks alone with her grief and doubt, and had come out the other side with absolute clarity. Lord Vexer presents a recording as evidence. I present the complete recording. She activated her own projection. Callum's voice filled the chamber again, but this time the whole conversation uncut, unedited. Some people will think the engagement is just a move to hold my position in the negotiations. But that's not what this is. The engagement could be the best thing that happened for both of us. The crystals rippled. Gold. Pure gold. Truth. The chamber murmured. Thesara raised her hand again. Lord Vexer's recording was altered. The second half of Diplomat Wren's statement was removed deliberately to create a false impression. Vexer stood straighter. I received that recording from you. Manufactured that recording. Seraphina's voice cut like light through glass. Or had it manufactured. The editing is consistent with software available only to members of the Advisory Council, of which you are one. The crystals around Seraphina burn gold. Every word verified. Every accusation true. The crystals around Vexer had gone very, very still. But the recording is not why I'm here, Seraphina continued. Lord Vexer's argument is that Callum Wren manipulated me, that his humor was strategic, his kindness calculated, his proposal a tactical maneuver. She let the words settle. I am heir negotiator to the Valorian throne. I have been trained since childhood to detect manipulation, deception, strategic emotional deployment. I have negotiated with 17 different species across 4-star systems. I have identified and neutralized more manipulative tactics than Lord Vexer has ever attempted. Her voice hardened. And yet Lord Vexer suggests that I, of all people, was fooled by a man who can't get through subsection 47 without making a joke about tariff structures. A sound from the gallery. Quick, suppressed. Something that might have been laughter. Either I am the most incompetent negotiator in Valorian history, or Callum Wren's behavior was genuine. Lord Vexer cannot have it both ways. He cannot praise my skill when it serves his politics and dismiss it when it threatens them. She let that land, heavy, precise, a demolition charge placed at the foundation of Vexer's entire argument. Then she changed, softened, the negotiator stepping back, the woman stepping forward. But evidence and logic are not why I invoke the sovereign bond. She turned to the arbiter's platform. Honored Thesara, I request permission to present personal testimony under the full verification of the chamber crystals. Proceed. What followed was not legal argument. It was memory. Seraphina activated a new projection, not legal documents, not recordings of negotiations. Something else entirely. 8 months compressed into moments. Callum in a corridor. Month 2. Leaning against a wall. Exhausted. Defeated. And Seraphina's voice quiet. Are you tired? The crystals turned soft gold. Memory verified. Callum in month 4 in a closed meeting with his own delegation. The audio clear. My brother isn't here. I am. And I'm telling you this clause matters. Defending Valorian interests to his own people. When he didn't know she was watching. Gold. True. Callum in month 6 standing in her study holding a coffee mug. Awkward. Earnest. Because nobody should have to suffer through another cup of liquid regret when there's an alternative. A container of earth coffee. His only luxury from home. Given away without hesitation. Gold. True. And then, the moment. The one Callum hadn't known was recorded, the one he thought was private sacred, just between them. Month 7, the biodome, late cycle. His voice cracking as he talked about Declan, about being the replacement, about not being enough, tears on his face in the artificial starlight, and Seraphina beside him, silent, her hand on the bench next to his, close enough to touch, not touching, letting him choose. The crystals glowed, not gold this time, something deeper, warmer, a color Callum had never seen before. The color the chamber made apparently when something was not just true but sacred. The gallery was silent, absolutely, completely silent. This is the man Lord Vexer calls a manipulator, Seraphina said, and her voice wavered just once, a crack in the composure that she didn't try to hide. A man who cried in front of me because he missed his brother. A man who brought me coffee because he noticed I was tired. A man who defended my people's interest to his own delegation when no one was watching. She turned to face Callum, and for the first time in 2 weeks their eyes met without walls between them. Manipulators do not cry real tears. Strategists do not give away their only comfort. Tacticians do not defend their opponent's position in private. Her voice strengthened. Found bedrock. Callum Wren is not a perfect man. He hides behind humor. He deflects when he should confront. He makes jokes when he should speak plainly. He proposed marriage as a punchline because he was too terrified to propose it as a question. A breath, almost a laugh, almost a sob. But he is honest, genuinely, fundamentally honest. Not in the way diplomats are honest, carefully, strategically. He is honest the way people are honest when they've stopped trying to impress anyone and have started just being who they are. Gold, blazing gold, the whole chamber glowing with it. I did not accept his proposal because I was manipulated. I accepted it because I have spent 8 months watching a man who thought he wasn't enough be more than enough every single day without realizing it. She turned back to the arbiters. My mother, before she died, told me to choose someone who sees me when I'm not wearing my crown. Callum Wren has never once in 8 months treated me like a princess. He treats me like a person, like a colleague, like a friend who happens to have pointed ears and a government surveillance device on her head. Another near laugh from the gallery, quickly suppressed. That is not manipulation. That is love, clumsy, terrified, disguised as humor, but love. The crystals sang. That was the only word for it, a resonance, a harmony. The chamber itself responding to truth so deep it had a frequency. Seraphina stepped back, composed again but different, lighter, like she'd set down something she'd been carrying for a very long time. I rest my testimony. Silence. Long, full. The kind that happens when an entire room is holding its breath. Arbiter Thesara looked at Callum. Those ancient eyes seeing everything, every joke, every deflection, every wall he'd ever built. Diplomat Wren, the princess has spoken. You have been silent. This council would hear from you. Callum stepped forward. His legs were steady, somehow. His hands were not. He clasped them behind his back the way Declan used to before presentations. Not because he was trying to be Declan, because some gestures are inherited, carried in blood and bone, and borrowing your brother's steadiness when your own runs out is an imitation. It's family. Honored arbiters, I'm not great at formal testimony. I tend to make jokes when I'm nervous, which is probably what got me into this situation in the first place. His voice echoed off of crystal walls, turning to light. No hiding, no masks, every word visible. Lord Vexer says I manipulated Seraphina, that my humor was strategy, my kindness calculation. He paused. And I understand why he thinks that, because in his world, everything is strategy. Every act of kindness is a transaction. Every gesture has a price tag. He can't imagine someone being genuine because he's never been genuine himself. The crystals around Vexer flickered, not gold, not copper, something dark and contested. But here's the truth, and I know these walls can tell if I'm lying. So I'm going to say this knowing that if it's not true, everyone in this room will see it. He took a breath and let the walls down. All of them. Every joke, every deflection, every layer of armor he'd spent a lifetime building. I'm scared. Gold. Immediate. Bright. I've been scared since the day I got this assignment. Because I'm not my brother. Declan was the diplomat. The natural. The one everyone wanted. He started this work, built these relationships. He was supposed to be standing here, not me. Gold. Unwavering. I make jokes because feeling things directly terrifies me. I learned that trick young, make them laugh and they won't notice you're drowning. Works great at parties. Works great in negotiations. Works terribly when you're trying to tell someone you love them. He looked at Seraphina, her dark eyes fixed on him. Tears on her face, not hidden, not wiped away. Just there, present, acknowledged. When I made that joke about marriage, I was joking. Absolutely, 100%. My brain was mush from 12 hours of tariff negotiations, and my mouth was operating independently of my dignity. A sound from the gallery. Brief, human and Valorian alike. But, the word hung in the air, turning to light, the crystals waiting. Seraphina was right, about what was underneath it. Because I'd been thinking about her for months, wanting to tell her, wanting to be honest. and being too much of a coward to say it without wrapping it in a joke. Gold. Deep. Resonant. My brother Declan, he didn't need jokes. He said what he meant. He lived with his heart open, and everyone loved him for it. Callum's voice cracked that line he'd been walking for 2 years, finally giving way entirely. And then he died, and I looked at his open heart and I thought that's what happens when you don't protect yourself. He swallowed hard. So I built walls, higher and thicker every year, lined them with humor and deflection, told myself that feeling things was dangerous, that vulnerability was weakness, that if I just kept everyone laughing, nobody would notice I was broken. Gold, burning, the whole chamber warm with it. And then I met a woman who sat beside me in a corridor and asked if I was tired, and didn't try to fix me, didn't compare me to my brother, didn't tell me it would get better. She just sat there and let me be tired. He wiped his face, not hiding the tears, not anymore. And then she laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, especially the bad ones. And she drank terrible coffee because I brought it to her. And she let me talk about Declan in a biodome under fake stars. And she didn't say a word. She just stayed. He looked at the Sara, at the floating platforms, at the crystal walls that turned every word to light. Seraphina said, "I'm not perfect." She's right. I'm not. I hide behind humor. I deflect when I should be direct. I proposed marriage as a punchline because I was too scared to say I love you like a normal person. Gold, blazing. But I do love her, not the princess, not the air negotiator. Her, the person who analyzes my jokes and studies human idioms and keeps coffee in her room because it reminds her of a night when someone was honest with her. He turned to Seraphina. I didn't plan this. I didn't strategize it. I fell in love with you in a corridor, on a bench that's too short, over coffee that's terrible, and I was too stupid and too scared to say it out loud. Gold, everywhere. The chamber incandescent. But I'm saying it now, in front of crystals that know when I'm lying, in front of arbiters and advisors, and a man who wants me exiled from this entire star system. He straightened. Declan's gesture, his brother's steadiness, borrowed one last time. I love Seraphina. My proposal was a joke. My feelings are not. And I'm done hiding them behind punchlines. The crystals held their light, sustained, unbroken, a harmony so pure it was almost audible. Truth, verified, absolute. The Sara sat motionless for a long time. The chamber weighted crystals slowly dimming from their blazing gold to something softer, warmer, like embers after a fire. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. In my years on this council, I have heard many testimonies. Political calculations dressed as passion, strategic alliances disguised as love, the powerful using affection as currency. She looked at Vexer, briefly, but in that briefness was a verdict. What I have heard today is different. Two people from different worlds, different species, different cultures who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Not through strategy, through exhaustion, through humor, through the small acts of presence that cannot be faked because they have no audience. She leaned forward on her floating platform. Lord Vexer's evidence is demonstrably altered, his accusations contradicted by the chamber's own verification. His challenge is not born of concern for the princess's welfare, but of political ambition threatened by genuine connection. Vexer opened his mouth. The Sara raised one hand, and the look she gave him could have stopped a star from burning. This council rules the engagement between Princess Seraphina and Callum Wren valid. Lord Vexer's challenge is denied. A beat, one heartbeat, two. However, the chamber stilled again. The circumstances of this engagement are unprecedented. A human and a Valorian, a diplomat and a princess, a proposal born from humor and accepted from love. The Sara paused. Such a union requires more than legal validation. It requires proof not for this council, but for themselves. She looked at Seraphina, then at Callum. Princess Seraphina, Callum Wren, this council adds one condition. You will complete the trade agreement together as co-chairs, seated on the same side of the negotiation table, working not as adversaries but as partners. The gallery murmured. The Tsara silenced it with a look. If the agreement succeeds, your union is confirmed permanently. This council believes that love tested by collaboration, by compromise, by the daily work of building something together is love that endures. She almost smiled. Almost. You have proven you can fight for each other. Now prove you can work with each other. This council is adjourned. The platforms descended, the arbiters rose, and the chamber began to empty. And Callum stood there in the center of a crystal room, still glowing gold, trying to understand that he'd won, that they'd won, that the universe, against all probability and common sense, had decided to reward a man who'd proposed marriage as a joke and meant every word of it. Vexor left without speaking, his back rigid, his political future collapsing behind him with every step. Draven surprisingly paused at the door, turned back, looked at Callum with an expression that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't disapproval either. You are still an undignified human with no sense of proper decorum. Thank you, Lord Draven. That was not a compliment. I know, but you didn't file a formal complaint about it, so I'm counting it as progress. Draven made the cave wind sound, but his ears, Callum noticed, didn't flatten in distress. They stayed neutral, which for Draven was practically a standing ovation. Margot caught his eye from across the chamber. She didn't come to him, couldn't officially as a neutral observer, but she nodded. Once. Small. And her eyes were bright. Lyra was openly crying, which Callum hadn't thought Valorians did, but apparently when the occasion warranted it, they cried exactly the way humans did. Messily. Beautifully. Without any dignity at all. And then the chamber was empty. Almost. Crystals dimming to their resting state, soft purple, the color of twilight on a planet Callum had never visited, but was starting to think of as home. Seraphina stood across from him, 10 feet of crystal floor between them. Hair loose, eyes wet, not hiding it. White dress simple, the kind of thing you wore when you decided to stop being anyone other than yourself. No cuffs on her ears, no counsel listening, no records being made, just her. Callum crossed the distance, not running, not hesitating, walking steady the way you approach something you've decided to hold on to. He stopped in front of her, close, close enough to see the tears still on her face, the slight redness around her eyes, the way her lower lip trembled just barely. You came, he said. I almost didn't. What changed your mind? Seraphina reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out something small, held it between them. A coffee bean, single, dark roasted, from the container he'd given her on month 6. I was sitting on the floor of my quarters holding the coffee you gave me, and I realized something. That a man who gives away his last comfort to make someone else's day better is not a man who lies about his feelings. She closed her fingers around the bean, and that I was more afraid of being hurt than I was of losing you. And those two things, being hurt and losing you, were not the same fear. They just felt the same. I stood outside your door, he said, and I told you to come to the hearing, but I didn't know if you heard me. I heard everything. Everything. Every word through the door. I sat on the floor and listened and cried. She paused. And I didn't open the door because my mother told me to choose someone who sees me. But she never said anything about letting that person see me cry. And that felt more terrifying than any hearing. Why? Because crying means the armor is off, and without armor you can be wounded. Seraphina. Yes. You just stood in front of a crystal court that detects lies, removed your council cuffs, bet your entire royal status on telling the truth about your feelings in front of hundreds of people. He took her hand, the one holding the coffee bean, her fingers longer than his, warmer than he expected. I think the armor's been off for a while. She laughed, short, watery, real. The kind of laugh that comes when you've been holding everything tight and someone says the exact right thing and you just let go. From now on, Callum said, we scare each other together. Deal. That is not how deals are traditionally proposed. Yeah, well, my last proposal was a joke about tariff schedules. I'm not great at traditional. She laughed again. Bigger, fuller. A sound he'd been working toward for 8 months, the sound of Seraphina without walls. Deal, she said. They stood there for a moment longer, the crystal chamber dimming around them, the last echoes of testimony fading from the walls, the lights settling into something quiet and private. Callum, yeah, when you stood outside my door and said all those things about the corridor on month 2, the coffee on month 6, the biodome on month 7, you listed them in order. I did. You remembered the exact sequence, every moment, in order. He hadn't realized that, hadn't been thinking about sequence when he'd been standing outside her door with his heart in his throat and his forehead against cold metal. He'd just been talking, saying what came. But she was right. He'd listed them chronologically, because somewhere in his memory those moments weren't just moments, they were a timeline, a map of falling in love, charted without his permission, filed in the part of his brain that apparently kept better records than he realized. I guess I did. Do you know what that tells me? That I have an unexpectedly organized subconscious, that you weren't performing, you weren't constructing a narrative to persuade me. You were remembering, she paused. There's a difference between a story someone builds and a story someone lived. Yours was lived. Callum looked at her, at this woman who analyzed everything. Joke's behavior, courtship patterns, legal precedents, and realized that her analytical mind wasn't cold. It was how she loved. Other people loved with their hearts. Seraphina loved with her attention. She noticed things. She remembered. She tracked the small details that everyone else overlooked, and she'd been tracking him for 8 months. You're kind of terrifying, you know that, he said. I've been told. In a good way. Mostly. Mostly is acceptable. They walked out of the chamber together through corridors that gleamed with bioluminescent light, past windows showing the void, past advisory offices where the news was already spreading past Valorian officials who stopped and stared and human observers who did the same. Seraphina's hand in his, her fingers longer, her grip steady. We have to complete the trade agreement, Callum said. Together, same side of the table. Yes, including subsection 47, unfortunately, including reciprocal tariff adjustments on non-sentient biological exports. That is part of the agreement, yes. Together. Together. They reached the conference room, the same room where everything had started. 12-hour sessions and terrible coffee and a joke that changed the course of 2 civilizations. The table was still there, long, polished, designed for 2 delegations facing each other across an impossible divide. But now 2 chairs sat side by side on the same side facing the rest of the room. Lyra's, probably. She worked fast. Callum pulled out a chair for Seraphina. She sat. He sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. The hollow display humming to life star charts and trade routes in approximately 47 subsections of mind-numbing bureaucratic language waiting for them. This is going to be complicated, Callum said. More complicated than an accidental proposal. Probably. Subsection 47 alone is, then we will handle it the way we handle everything. With inappropriate humor and terrible coffee. With honesty, Seraphina said. And occasional humor and better coffee. I'm told Earth has many varieties. You have no idea. There's a whole world of coffee you haven't experienced. Espresso, cappuccino, cold brew, something called a flat white that I'm fairly sure was invented specifically to start arguments. You'll have to educate me. I'll add it to the diplomatic agenda, right after subsection 47 and right before the part where I meet your sister and she tests my quantum mechanics knowledge. You know nothing about quantum mechanics. I know that particles can be in 2 states at once, which feels relevant, because right now I'm simultaneously terrified and happy, and I think that counts. Seraphina smiled. Not the almost smile, not the diplomatic quarter smile, not the controlled crack in the composure. A real smile, full, warm, radiant like the moment in the hearing chamber when he'd said he loved her and the crystals had burned gold. A smile that meant every wall was down, every mask removed, every layer of princess and negotiator and dutiful daughter set aside. Just Seraphina, smiling at a man who made too many jokes and gave away his coffee and proposed marriage as a punchline because the truth was too big to say out loud. For the record, she said, I'm not going to joke about wedding dates. Good, because when I propose a date, I will be entirely serious. Callum blinked. When you're going to propose the date, I propose the first time by accepting your joke. It seems fitting that I continue to set the pace. That's okay. Yeah, that's fair. You're speechless. Give me a second. It happens about once a decade. I'll treasure this moment. He laughed, and she laughed, and the sound of it filled the conference room the way it had never been filled before, not with arguments or diplomatic tensions or the exhausting precision of interstellar negotiation, with joy. The strange, unlikely, impossible joy of two people who'd found each other across an ocean of stars through humor and stubbornness, and the terrifying act of being honest when everything inside you was screaming to make a joke instead. Outside through the observation windows, Valindra turned slowly in space. Three moons, auroras in impossible colors, cloud formations with opinions about meteorology, and somewhere on a station orbiting that impossible planet, a man who'd spent his whole life being the replacement had stopped trying to be someone else, had stood in front of a crystal court with nothing but the truth, and found out that the truth, messy and scared and wrapped in bad jokes, was enough, more than enough. I wasn't Declan, would never be Declan, and for the first time that didn't feel like failure, it felt like freedom. Seraphina reached under the table and found his hand, her fingers longer, her skin warmer, her grip saying everything her diplomat's voice wouldn't say in a room that might be recorded. I chose you, not your brother's ghost, not a strategy, not an escape. You. Callum squeezed back, and together, side by side, they opened subsection 47. The galaxy was vast and complicated and full of diplomatic protocols that could be triggered by careless humor. But Callum figured if he could accidentally propose his way into an engagement with alien royalty, survive a political attack by a power-hungry lord, stand alone in a crystal courtroom, and say I love you while the walls turned his words to light, he could probably handle whatever came next. Probably. His fiancée was literal royalty with a smile that could end wars. His future sister-in-law was going to quiz him on quantum physics. The trade agreement still had 46 more subsections to go. And somewhere Lord Vexer was licking his wounds and planning his next move. But the coffee was real, and the person beside him was real. And the feeling in his chest, that terrifying, beautiful, unguarded feeling he'd spent his whole life hiding from, that was real too. Callum Wren, the lesser Wren, the replacement, the joke maker, except he wasn't any of those things anymore. Or maybe he still was. Maybe he'd always be the guy who made too many jokes, who reached for humor when the silence got too loud, who expressed love through terrible coffee and worse punchlines. But he was also the man who stood alone in a crystal courtroom and said the truth out loud, who chose honesty over safety, who learned slowly, painfully, through 8 months of negotiation and 2 weeks of heartbreak, that being seen was worth the risk of being seen. That's what Seraphina had given him. Not just love, though, that was part of it. She'd given him permission to be himself without apology, to stop measuring himself against a ghost, to understand that the way he loved clumsily, humorously sideways wasn't lesser, just different. And different, it turns out, was exactly what she needed. Somewhere out there, past the observation windows and the auroras and the 3 pearl moons, Declan Wren's unfinished work was waiting to be completed. Not by his ghost, not by his replacement, by his brother.